with no provisions for statehood or even resistance. Can a real Palestinian future be negotiated in Egypt? Hopeful words over the weekend said Hamas agrees in principle to Trump's 20-point peace plan, but will talks now underway prove vague language too complicated to reconcile? As Israel's assault on Gaza continues, can the U.S. and Israel be trusted to enforce peace if hostages are released first? I'm Andrea Sankey, and today's newsmaker is the 20-point Gaza peace plan. U.S. President Trump wants negotiations underway in Sharm El Sheikh to move fast. And though most are desperate for a ceasefire in Gaza, a culmination of decades of conflict likely can't be resolved in a short time. Even President Trump's own demand to pause the assault on Gaza while talks get underway was ignored. Still, negotiators are meeting to discuss what's there and explore any way forward through Trump's 20 points. Here's a look.
In Egypt, a fragile hope takes shape. And for Gaza, it may be the last one left. Delegations from Israel and Hamas have begun talks that could end a 2-year war, one that has killed more than 67,000 Palestinians and left much of Gaza in ruins. Around the table sit power and exhaustion, and beyond it, a US president intent on turning war into a peace deal with his name on it. Donald Trump's 20-point plan offers a ceasefire, reconstruction, and a promise of so-called eternal peace. Israel has signaled approval. Hamas has not said no, agreeing to release hostages, but insisting that disarmament and governance must be determined by Palestinians themselves. In Egypt, Trump's envoys, Jared Kushner and Steve Witkoff, are pushing talks forward, focused on an initial ceasefire and the release of Israeli hostages. On the eve of the talks, Donald Trump hailed new meetings with regional leaders, casting them as proof his peace plan is working, even as doubts persist.
We had some very good meetings. The countries of the world, a lot of the countries surrounding Israel, frankly, Muslim, Arab, and many others, have had great meetings with Hamas, and it looks like it's working. So we'll wait for a little while, see how it all turns out.
But even as Trump spoke, Gaza's skies told another story. In Wadi Gaza, plumes of black smoke billowed through the morning, Israel continuing to pound the enclave even as its delegates sit for talks.
It's all in Israel's interest. I have been occupied since the day God created the world, and I'm still occupied. Is there a solution for me to be liberated from the occupation? I don't think so. If 1,000 governments come to rule Gaza, would they free me from the occupation? I think it's impossible.
The peace plan on the table may promise reconstruction and statehood, but it leaves key questions unanswered. For many Palestinians, decisions about their future still feel distant, driven more by outside powers than by those under siege.
Peace plans and political settlements, including the ones put forward by the White House just recently, don't directly look to engage Palestinians and Palestinian leadership. And I think that is a big challenge going forward. We're talking about statehood, but we're doing so in tandem with a discussion of a demilitarized Palestine that is also supposed to be sovereign.
Talks may pause the fighting, but in Gaza, peace remains an elusive dream. And for its people, it will only be real when the skies fall silent and lives no longer hang on negotiations.
So how much hope should hang on these negotiations? Well, joining me now to debate that and much more are from Ramallah, Palestinian-Canadian lawyer and former spokesperson for the Palestinian Liberation Organization, Buttu. From London, senior consulting fellow at Chatham House, Yossi Mekelberg. And from Washington, research fellow in the Middle East program at the Quincy Institute and former U.S. State Department official, Annelle Sheline. Thanks all so much for being with me. Deanna, you wrote a piece recently stating that this plan is simply a repackaging of genocide for Israel's benefit. but Hamas is responding to the proposals at least, and the process, I guess, is moving forward. So is that all farcical to you, or do you actually see some hope here?
Well, I think it's really important to step back and note that nobody wants to see this genocide end more than Palestinians. And it's important to also remember that Israel, as a state, poses an existential threat to Palestinians. But at the same time, it's absolutely absurd that Palestinians have been forced to negotiate this end to genocide. And at the same time, because we've been forced to negotiate an end to genocide, that's why you're actually seeing that Hamas is engaging. This is why they're saying that they're willing to engage with the part in relation to the ceasefire. But the other elements, namely the issue of the what's going to happen in the aftermath, that this is something that requires broader Palestinian consensus. But more importantly, that what we're really seeking is that this not be a repackaging of the occupation, that this not be giving a repackaging of this genocide. And the plan, as it is laid out now, simply provides that. It is really just a repackaging of this genocide. If Hamas doesn't agree, it's as though they have given a green light to genocide. They're going to be blamed for the genocide. And that's not the way that the world should be working.
Yeah. So, Yossi, I mean, is this progress we're hearing about really only a factor of time pressure to meet Trump's demands for a quick resolution?
There is an element of it that's, whatever happens, it has to fit what Trump wants. I think the main difficulty here, how we make the best out of an horrific situation. And no doubt what's happening in Gaza, it's nothing short of horrific. And we keep seeing the pictures for many, many months, and no one stopped it. And this is a collective failure of the international community. So now, in the last week, there is some progress, but it's must ensure that this progress also lead to a permanent solution which respects the rights of everyone. But the first step must be end of this war. And as I say, it should have ended many months ago. But here we are in this situation. End the war, see the hostages back, the release of prisoners, more humanitarian aid enter into Gaza. But then the big question, whether then, if the war ends, there is loss of focus by the international community and there is no progress on ending the occupation, moving towards a just and fair solution, or actually the international community learned anything from the last 2 years and will maintain its focus on how to go back to the root causes of this conflict and address all of them in a way that everyone in Palestine, in Israel, will enjoy the same rights, the same political rights, the same civil rights, the same human rights, the same security, with no discrimination.
Yeah. Annelle, I mean, is it progress? Because you've talked about how this Hamas response only really reflects previous positions that they'd already taken. They'd said before they were willing to release the hostages in exchange for a real ceasefire. But even now, I mean, Israel has not stopped its attacks. So is anything truly different in this process?
Unfortunately, there's not much that's different in this process. I think the reason there's some optimism is because it does seem that Trump may be willing potentially to pressure Israel. We know that Trump knows how to get Netanyahu to agree to a ceasefire because he did it in January. And my understanding is that he was willing to threaten the American supply of weapons that Israel depends on to carry out its genocide. So clearly Trump knows how to get Netanyahu to listen. It's just a question of, has he been willing to exert that same level of pressure this time? Thus far, it does not appear so. Although Trump has come on social media several times and said things like Israel needs to stop bombing, Israel has bombed continually since Hamas gave their provisional acceptance, as Diana mentioned, they acknowledged the fact that they are not in a position to fully negotiate an end solution. That is something that needs to reflect the full Palestinian people and their desires for self-determination. But Hamas is able and is in a position to negotiate a release of Israeli captives, which, as you said, they've been willing to do for months. Back in November 2023, they said they were willing to release all the captives they had in exchange for a true end to the war. And instead, Israel has very much benefited from having the Israeli captives in Gaza as a way to justify their ongoing genocide. So from Israel's perspective, they're not even that interested in getting the hostages back. There have been Israeli officials that have said the hostages are an impediment to our ability to carry out this full annihilation of what they say is Hamas, but really what is the annihilation of Palestinians in Gaza.
Deanna, then, what do Palestinians in Gaza have left? For those who've actually never even supported Hamas, would they want to go back to the status quo of occupation and living in an open-air prison just to survive at this point? Because Trump is now threatening complete obliteration of Hamas, which effectively means the complete obliteration of Gaza.
But why does that have to be the equation? Why is it that this is the way that we're speaking, that the obliteration of Hamas equals the obliteration of Gaza? Why isn't it that we're looking and using and examining things through the lens of international law, international human rights law, international humanitarian law?
Because it's never applied to Israel.
But this is the problem. So I was just going to get to that. So why is the onus being put on those who are victims rather than the oppressors? And so I want to turn it around and say, this is now the time for sanctions. This isn't the time to be asking Palestinians, do you want to be killed by having a gun shooting at your head, or do you want to be killed by being stabbed to death? The question is, shouldn't we be focusing on the killer? And that's why I think this is the time for global sanctions. If anything that these 2 years have shown us is that the system of international law has actually failed. It's succeeded on the one hand in garnering world attention, but it's failed in its enforcement. And so now is the time that we need to get people around the world to disrupt, to make sure that their governments are not continuing to fuel this weapons supply that is heading down towards Israel.
Okay, I mean, Yossi, the U.S. has never even mentioned sanctions as a stick to be used in convincing Israel to do anything other than what it's been doing. So the other part of the equation here is where does the Israeli administration really stand in this peace process? Because we know the more extremist partners in Netanyahu's coalition are not at all interested in what's on the table. So is there a way for Netanyahu to cynically go into negotiations and say that they're complying with the first stages, get the hostages back, and then duplicitously go back to his partners and say, okay, now let's look for a reason to begin the genocide again?
Yeah. That's why I said that international law, unfortunately, is not enforced not only on the case of Israel and Palestine. Maybe it's more prominent there, but it happens in many different places. And there is a failure of the post-Second World War collective security, as we see it in the UN, in the Security Council. This is a very unfortunate state of affairs. As for Netanyahu, is he capable and sometimes willing to sabotage any deal? Yes, he has done it so many times in the past. No reason to believe that if it serves his own personal interest, his survival in government, especially when he's still facing his corruption trial, he probably will resort to this. But I think there is the tide is turned. It's not the same. And whether it's sanctions or not, we see a change in the international community. Israel is more isolated than ever. We see the change in Europe, in other countries. So there is something is happening. Without this war, probably most of the countries that recently recognized Palestinian state would not have done it, though they should have done it a long time ago. As for the specific question, if Netanyahu wants to pass this deal, he doesn't need the ultra-nationalist the messianic elements within his government, because the opposition in Israel said time and again, will support you, will back you up in the Knesset to pass such a resolution. So he has a majority in the Knesset. He doesn't have a majority to continue in his government indefinitely. But, we enter basically into an election year in Israel. Between now and October, election must be held according to the law. And Netanyahu probably will have to make his decision. Who is afraid more of President Trump or of Ben-Gvir? We've seen in the past that Trump is the big stick more than anyone else in the international community, and he might just choose to go for a deal if Washington press him hard enough, and then call election whenever it suits him.
Yeah. I heard Diana agree there. I'm wondering what Annelle thinks. And also, if the bottom line is if Netanyahu doesn't want a Palestinian state, are we just talking about a return to the unsustainable status quo, i.e., Gaza becomes that open-air prison again under occupation, in which, more than 60,000 people would have died for nothing?
Unfortunately, I do think that is what Netanyahu is pushing for. And I want to reiterate what Deanna said about the need for sanctions. I think a crucial factor that's missing here is that the Israeli population has not really had to pay for the fact that their government and their military are committing genocide. Thus far, the majority of countries in the world still allow Israelis to travel there. They maintain trade relations, including countries that have otherwise been rhetorically quite critical of Israel, whether it's China, for example, maintain ongoing trade relationships. I think Europe is a crucial factor here. And what's been interesting is in Europe, you see this becoming a domestic political issue where whether it's in Italy, where you have opposition parties that agree on very little, but they agree that this is genocide and they're using that to call to enact general strikes. We see that similarly in Spain, where Sanchez has been able to use this issue, whereas otherwise his popularity was declining. So my hope is that because Europe remains Israel's largest trading partner, that we'll continue to see pressure build inside Europe for a downgrading of Israel's trade status with Europe. But again, all of that won't really change that much as long as the United States is still willing to back up Israel unconditionally. But my hope is that that's changing too, because even with Americans that have so long supported Israel, we're really seeing a shift. Even recently, a poll among American Jews saying that I believe a majority at this point at least question the unconditional relationship. A much larger percentage view what Israel is doing as genocide, which is a big swing in public opinion. So I think Trump is aware of the ways that this is splintering his base. It's very hard to maintain the argument that he has an America first foreign policy when it's very clear he has an Israel first foreign policy. And you have many politicians that are increasingly gearing up for the midterms next year that are tapping into the fact that Americans are shocked and horrified by this genocide, no longer want to support Israel unconditionally, and are making this a key part of their platforms, which is something that was very important to the most recent U.S. presidential election that the Democrats did not pick up on. And polls have shown that that was a significant factor in why Kamala Harris lost to Trump.
Okay, Diana, is there any possibility here that over in Egypt, Hamas would agree to take that leap of faith, take that first major step and return all the hostages to Israel, and then trust the process in order for peace? No, you're shaking your head already, because Israel has made it clear that if they don't get that, it's on Hamas, it's their fault, and this will continue until what? Gaza is absolutely nothing will be left.
Well, let me back up. So the plan and all of the ceasefires, by the way, all the ceasefire agreements that have been reached in the past, call for an exchange of the Israeli captives for Palestinian captives. There are more than 11,000 Palestinians, about 10,000 of them, 11,000 Palestinians, thousands of them who were picked up in the aftermath of October 7th, therefore they are hostages, including 450 children. And so all of these agreements have been focused on releasing both the Israelis, the 48 Israelis, as well as those Palestinians who are languishing in Israeli prisons, being tortured, many being raped, being mistreated, and so on. Right now, if you're just talking about releasing the Israelis and not releasing Palestinians,
no,
I
am talking specifically about the leverage that Hamas would even have going forward. Is this all they have, or is there more to it?
So what they've said is that they're willing to release that their area is captives for captives, that they're willing to release the Israelis in exchange for Palestinians being released. This is what they said from day one. And they also said from day one, release the captives, end the war. This is also from what they said from day one. By the way, that offer was on the table from the second day of October the 9th. And that's it. In terms of the bigger picture of what Trump is now trying to do, of squeezing Palestinians and so on, no, they're not going to take that leap of faith, and I'll explain why. Right now, 80% of the population of the Gaza Strip is trapped into 18% of the Gaza Strip. Before October the 7th, the Gaza Strip was the most densely populated place on earth. Right now, you can imagine that 80% of the population has been squeezed into 18%, making it that much more densely populated. There are no guarantees that the Israelis are actually going to pull back. And pursuant to the 20-point plan that they've laid out, they're only going to pull back from part, not all, of the Gaza Strip. So without those guarantees, there's certainly no way they're going to take that leap of faith. Okay. This is a country, Israel's a country that has never abided by any agreement. They've never abided by any UN resolution. So why is it that they're going to be the ones who take the leap of faith without any guarantees? It's just never. It's not
we know there's no symmetry in these negotiations. Let's not pretend there is. There never has been, to be fair. But we're still trying to move forward with what we have, what they have. So Yossi, I mean, I've always said it shocks me because it seems the easiest ask of all is just to at least stop the building of settlements, if not eliminate them entirely or promise to make that guarantee to move forward. It never seems to even budge. In fact, it only gets worse. But could settlements be part of these negotiations over the next few days to agree to withdraw, to give Palestinian land back, to make this process even the least bit viable?
Well, there is no question that the settlements are one of the main obstacles for any peaceful solution between the Israelis and Palestinians. A huge historical mistake. How many of them can be removed or not? And, you know, this has been negotiated many times, and probably in order to achieve a two-state solution in the one-state reality that has been created over the last 50 years since the settlement started. Probably we'll have to go through something different modality, probably maybe a confederation. Difficult to see, and not that I'm justifying keeping even single settlements, not in the West Bank or East Jerusalem. Sometimes we'll have to acknowledge some realities, but the most important thing, how we move forward, which we don't see the horrors of the last 2 years, if even before. I must admit, I don't know why we're insisting on Hamas being part. Probably I won't insist of seeing Netanyahu and Ben Gvir and Smotrich being in government. I think if both people want to move forward into a better future, they should probably rid themselves democratically of all this leadership. All what they brought on their people is disaster. You know, there are so many opportunities for peace and reconciliation. Look what we are. So is this the kind of leadership we want to lead us, or we deserve everyone in what was mandatory Palestine much better leadership?
That's the tragedy here, is all we have left are these extremes trying to negotiate peace when neither seems to be sincerely interested in fairness for all the people involved. But still, Annelle, having said that, we know there's no symmetry in these negotiations, that they're not each negotiating from a position of equality, equal recognition. From what position of weakness, I'll put it that way, do you think Palestinians will have to negotiate from? What are the gives they will have to make, as unfair as they may seem, if they are to move this process forward?
I mean, unfortunately, the worst case scenario, as Trump has previously discussed, is this idea of like the Trump Riviera plan, ethnic cleansing. I think one silver lining of this most recent plan is that Trump is not reiterating his position earlier that Palestinians had to be removed from Gaza. He is saying that they are allowed to stay, but then it's a question of, well, how will they survive there? I do worry that another worst case scenario is that once again, the international, well, not even that the United States will force Jordan to accept large numbers of Palestinians, which is an existential threat for Jordan and very much a red line for their government. But given the way things are going, I fear that could be one of these outcomes. I wanted to go back to something earlier about the question of settlements. I think it is just a reiteration of sort of the underlying disparity with which we view the value of Israeli lives versus Palestinian lives. This idea that it's inconceivable to remove the hundreds of thousands of Israeli settlers that have established themselves in the West Bank, and yet it's conceivable to ask the 2 million Palestinians in Gaza to remove themselves. It just doesn't make sense. Why is it conceivable to this population of Palestinians has been forced to move back and forth all over, just seeking some security, which is not available inside Gaza, and yet it's completely inconceivable to ask these illegal settlers to remove themselves from what could be potentially a future state of Palestine. So I think the most important reason you continue to see this completely unequal position here is because of the role of the United States that has continued to show Israelis, the Israeli public, the Israeli government, that they can keep getting more and more and more. And that's why now you have discussions of a greater Israel, of Israel expanding its footprint, Israel attacking 7 other countries. And most recently Qatar, in ways that are completely inimical to U.S. interests in the region. Israel is completely out of control because the U.S. enables them to do whatever they want and continues to throw money at them, even when they directly undermine U.S. interests. But as I said, Americans are waking up to this, and hopefully the American political establishment is also keyed into where Americans are on this. So I don't think U.S. unconditional support for Israel is very sustainable. And that may be part of why we're seeing Netanyahu and his government trying to grab as much as they can while they still have such a close ally in the White House like Trump.
Annelle, that will have to be the final word for this edition of the Newsmakers. I'd really like to thank all 3 of you so much, as always, for being with me, and our viewers for joining us as well. Remember, you can follow us on social media, and do be sure to subscribe to our YouTube channel. I'm Andrea Sankey. We'll see you next time.